Hello and welcome back to Kim's Cozy Corner. I'm Kim and today we are going to talk about all the different ways you can trellis your summer vegetables. Everyone's seen this contraption before for trellising tomatoes and maybe peppers, but in addition to this contraption, there are so many other ways to trellis your vegetables. So I'm going to share with you some traditional ways, some unique ways for vertical planting, as well as some tried and true methods. So let's move over to some of the GreenStalk towers so you can see how we trellis the GreenStalks. This here is a GreenStalk vertical tower. It has multiple tiers, 6 pockets on a tier, and you're growing vertically versus horizontally. And in this particular tower, there are 30 pockets that you can put vegetables in. If you've never heard of a GreenStalk, check out my video, All Things GreenStalk, or even my GreenStalk playlist, and you'll be able to see lots of different ways to start your GreenStalk, as well as you'll get to see all of the GreenStalks that I have in my garden. But this video is specifically talking about the trellising of the GreenStalk. In the description, I will include a link to the GreenStalk website. If you follow my link to their website, you can get a discount on your first order of $75 or more. But that's not what this video is about. This video is about the trellising. So in a GreenStalk, not only can you grow leafy greens, you can also grow larger vegetables, including vining vegetables. For your larger vegetables, like your tomatoes and your peppers, depending on what type of tomatoes and peppers you buy, you may need to trellis those vegetables. GreenStalk provides an option to trellis the vegetables using this right here. So it's a trellis that comes around the whole tier, and it allows the vegetables to spill out of the pocket, and then you can trellis them along these trellises, along these green pieces going around the GreenStalk. Now in this particular GreenStalk, I have peppers and tomatoes in the bottom 2 tiers. I'm only growing dwarf tomatoes in the bottom pocket. My dwarf tomatoes only get to about 3 to 4 feet tall. So I don't need a massive cage for those types of tomatoes, but they still may need just a little bit of support. So I have it so that the tomatoes will grow up and they can lean against this trellis here if it needs be. And I've also added some stakes. So there's a little stake here. It's just I think that's a 2-foot stake, and I'm just putting it down in the pocket just to the side of the plant to help support the stem just in case it gets overloaded with too many tomatoes, which is a great thing, right? So if it gets tons and tons of tomatoes, I want to make sure I'm supporting the stem as much as I possibly can. So not only do I have the trellis going around the outside, but I also have the stake here to help support the tomato plants in the bottom. In the second layer, I have peppers. I cut the tops off of my peppers to give me a shorter, bushier plant, but some peppers still want to grow straight up. And if they want to grow straight up, that's okay. And I've added some stakes just like this right beside the peppers as well, so we can provide support for them if need be. So that's the bottom 2 tiers. This next tier up here has cantaloupe in it and vining cucumbers in it. Now, depending on what type of cucumber and what type of melon you grow in your tower, you may need more room, you may need less room. So you really want to look at the varieties that you're putting in your GreenStalk. But the ones that I have in here, they will vine, but the vines won't go on and on for 10 feet. The type that I put in here are more of a bush type cucumber plant and a very short vining melon. I'm saying cantaloupe, but it's not really a cantaloupe. It's Delice dello table. I don't know. I'm saying it wrong. Here's a picture of the melon. It's similar to a cantaloupe, but the vines on those are not too bad. So this is perfect for them to vine on. Now, some people will say, well, it's a cantaloupe. You're going to need to support the weight of that melon. The melons growing in this particular GreenStalk are like individual size. They don't get very large, so it's not going to need a lot of support. But if I get that massive whopper of a melon, absolutely, we may need to tie up that melon itself to give it some support, because typically a cantaloupe and melons in that family won't come off the stem until they're ripe. So we don't want them to destem too early or devine too early. I have 2 trellises on this. You can purchase these from the GreenStalk website along with your GreenStalks. But let's move on to some other types of trellising. Since I'm already talking about cucumbers, wanted to show you a couple of other methods to support your cucumbers. I have 2 trellis here. I purchased them from a big box store years and years ago, and I just pull them back out and I've put them in the ground where I have 2 different types of cucumbers growing. The cucumbers will latch on, they will grow up to get off of the ground, so you don't have to worry about all of the disease and the splashback and those type things that you typically see when you let your vegetables sprawl along the ground. So I have 2 trellises for that. Right next to me here, this is just a stake. It's an 8-foot stake. And just below this 8-foot stake here is an indeterminate tomato. So indeterminate tomatoes are vining tomatoes that will grow and grow and grow until basically you come to the end of your season because of frost or disease or something of that nature takes the plant out. Since it's a vine that will continue to grow, it definitely needs support. So this particular method is just an 8-foot stake in the ground next to the plant. We will make sure that we prune the plant down to 1 or 2 liters, depending on how bushy and how quickly I can get to those suckers as they're coming in. And we will just continue to attach it to the pole as it's growing up the pole. Now let's move over and look at some other types of trellises. In my GreenStalk, I also talked about peppers and having little green stakes inside the pockets to help support the peppers. The traditional way, or what I'm used to seeing growing up in many, many years of gardening, are these what we call tomato cages. Tomato cages, there's a place for them. There's a place for them in your garden, but maybe not for every application. I have 5 of those tomato cages in this particular bed here, and they're going to help support some pepper plants. So this is a second method for supporting your pepper plants. The pepper plant's just going to grow up there, it's going to get bushy, and it'll lean against this cage as it continues to grow and produce. It's a simple way. It works pretty good for pepper plants, but not for indeterminate tomato plants, which can vine to 8-10 feet tall. But it's perfect for peppers if you have the room for this. If you don't have the room, you can always think about that single stake to support that main stem. Let's look at some other trellising. Over here in this bed, in these 2 beds actually, we are growing indeterminate tomatoes. So again, this is the vining tomato that we're talking about. And I said they can get 8 feet or 10 feet tall, and these are only about 4 feet tall. But in this particular area, I am limited in sunlight due to the trees. And so typically my tomatoes in this area kind of max out around the 5-foot mark. So I believe this type of trellising will work just fine in these beds over here. But this is a very expensive option to trellising. So if I remember correctly, and I bought these years ago now, but I think I paid anywhere from $8 to $10. It might have been more than $10 for one of these. So I saw them, I loved them. I couldn't afford them, but at the end of the year, they went on clearance and I got them for like $5 a piece. But that was clearance price, so you can imagine how much they cost today. But it's just a little V, versus a circle cage, and it's sturdy, it's strong. It doesn't bend when you try to put it in the ground. They're super sturdy and heavy duty material. And it's easy because the little branches of the stems come up and they just kind of lay over into this V here, which gives it tons of support. And they're pretty. These are very pretty in the garden, and they're such a beautiful color. But I didn't have enough for both beds, so in the back here, I have that traditional stake that I was talking about. It's 8 feet tall. Again, I don't believe the plants in this space here are going to get 8 feet tall, but I wanted to make sure that I was giving this plant extra support since it didn't have the beautiful cages on them, so it could rest its arms as it continued to stretch out. In this space here, I have a variety of different ways of supporting your vegetables. In the front here, I have those traditional tomato cages that I was talking about. And these are some smaller ones, but I'm not using them for tomatoes. I'm using them for cucumbers. The cucumbers are actually bush cucumbers. They only spread out to about 4 feet at most. And so I'm gonna kind of guide them up into these cages to get them up off of the ground. These last 2 trellises here are more like fan type trellises. One's a little heavier duty. They're made out of slightly different metal materials, but they're both fan style. And growing behind it are also cucumbers, but these are vining cucumbers that should grow up more than 3 to 4 feet long. So this provides them, again, a way to get up off the ground, but it's just another method to trellis your vegetables. Or you can make your own types of trellising. These were tomato cages that were square. They were about 4 feet tall. They were square, and we just opened them up, tied them next to some green stakes, poked them in the ground, and now I have a trellis that's, one, sturdier than those little tomato cages that you buy at the store, and I have additional height on this particular one. So I put some of my cucumbers that trellis, that really have long vines, so that the cucumbers can climb up and have plenty of room to put those cucumbers on. So on the end here, there's just a green pole holding together the tomato cage. It's just a traditional cage that you stick in the ground, and it's about 3.5, 4 feet tall at most. And it's like a square versus those circle tomato cages. And if you're really fortunate and you can find a good deal, or if money's not an option, these very decorative trellises can be purchased in many different places as well. But typically they also come with a pretty healthy price tag. For your trellises of this nature, purchase it at the end of the year on clearance, and you can probably get them for 20 bucks or so. During the regular season, these things are upwards of over $100, depending on how big, how fancy of design, how heavy duty the material. Is doable if you're just frugal and you really seek out those good deals, especially at the end of the gardening season for your area. I have a vining winter squash on here. I grew it last year, and it climbed all the way up over the trellis, down the back side of the trellis, down the side of the garden. When it hit the corner of the garden, we had to send it on a right-hand turn and turned it up the other side of the garden. And we only got 1 fruit off of it because I planted it a little too late. But I've planted those same winter squash this year in this bed, which is 1 bed down, which I'm hoping to give me even more room for that particular plant to spread its wings. So here's an up-close picture of the trellis. You see the nice swirls at the top there, bringing it all the way down so you can see it at the bottom. And it's almost too narrow for the plants that I have in here, but I'm on the back side of my neighbor's garden, so if we need to trellis more on the ground, we have open space here if need be for those winter squash. But it was a beautiful piece that I wanted to add to their garden this year. We are back in the main garden, just on the outside of my mini orchard, and I have a few more green stalks over here. This entire green stalk is full of nothing but tomatoes on this side here, and this green stalk is full of nothing but peppers. The tomatoes are dwarf tomatoes. They don't get very tall, but I wanted to make sure that I had plenty of support. So I have the green stalk trellising around 3 of the 4 levels. And you say, well, why only 3? You got 4 levels. Well, you don't need a trellis on the bottom tier because those tomato plants are growing up. They'll never touch that bottom layer. I learned that last year. That was such a waste. So you only need 3 on a 4-tier green stalk with tomatoes in it. Now, I added some additional supports here for the top tier because just like the bottom tier, where they're growing, that tier, this one's not going to help the tomatoes because they're growing up. So I added some plastic stakes to the top to help support the plants if need be. But I'm going to be honest with you, I'm not sure if I'm going to need them or not because I'm looking at the stems on here and they're super thick and they're just getting thicker and thicker and they're already starting to set blooms. So I may not need them, especially with these dwarf tomatoes. This is a different setup for me. I usually just grow determinate tomatoes in here, which is typically a shorter, bushier tomato, but these are not just determinate tomatoes. These are dwarf tomatoes. So they may set all the fruit at one time and they may continue to set fruit all season. It's a variety, but the thing that's in common for them is that they're all dwarf, 3 to 4 feet tall max on a height on each and every one of these in this green stalk. And this particular green stalk, again, many different types of peppers, but the same concept is true. The peppers have no need for any type of trellising on the bottom level. And when you get to the top level, the trellising doesn't work. So I have stakes in here, if need be, for all of the different pepper plants growing in that top tier. In this area here, I have my potato plants. They're all in containers. There's a little more than 30 containers in this space. And most people don't provide any support for their potato plants. The potato plants grow to a certain height and typically, you know, it's a good, 2 feet above the ground, maybe 3 feet above the ground. And it just stays at that height. It'll put blooms on. Once you get blooms, you have potatoes growing down below. Those hones or those stems can be very delicate if you get heavy winds or storms or anything of that nature. It could cause the stems to bend over and break prior to them being mature. Typically, over the last, 4 years or so, started buying these types of support. So hopefully you can see them here. They're green and the tops of the plants are green. But buying these supports to put over my potato plants just so that when the wind blows, if there's a storm, they have a little extra support. When the tops of your potato plants start to fall over and die back, that means that your potatoes are mature and they're ready to be harvested, unless you want new potatoes. Well, I want to make sure that I keep my potatoes in the ground as long as possible because I want bigger potatoes to harvest. So these supports help them stay strong and healthy and only fall over when they're ready to be harvested because they are mature. Let's move on to the next 2 types of supports. In this space here, I have what's called a mighty crop support. If you've seen any of my other videos, I actually shared a video on this type of support, and I also shared that the product was discontinued and it wasn't an option. I was incorrect. I have been in contact with the Mighty Crop Company thanks to one of our wonderful viewers. So I just want to say thank you for putting me in contact with them. And the Mighty Crop support that I have here can be purchased on Amazon. And so they were out of stock on Amazon. They're being restocked. And if you would like to purchase these, you can get them on Amazon. And the name of the company is Mighty Crop. I will put their information in my description below. And here's the flyer. It talks about a lot of information, including how to set up the mighty crop to be used in the garden. You can use it for many different things. I initially purchased these, I call them my spinning disc. I originally purchased these to be used with my potato plants because I wanted to protect the stems of my potato plants. And I quickly realized that this is perfect to support tomato plants, pepper plants, potato plants, like anything that needs support. A rose bush would even work on this. It slides up and down. You can set it to whatever level you need it to be in your garden. And so for my tomato plants, I let my tomato plants get about 2 feet tall or more before I start utilizing these. And I purchased quite a few more so I can have 3 on each one of my stakes. They will fit multiple type stakes down the center. Once my tomato plant gets tall enough, I will let that tomato plant grow up and in and through this spinny disc here. And then it'll grow another 2 or 3 feet. And then I'll let it capture in the next spinny disc and all the way up. In this particular part of my garden, I have had tomato plants grow up and over my garage here beside me. And I have been on a ladder to harvest in the past. So I want to make sure that I'm managing my stems. I still need to prune, right? Because you need to make sure you're getting airflow. So you're going to need to still prune down, but you can keep more than one lead. This is what the Mighty Crop brand looks like when it's not on a stake. You can see here that it accepts multiple size. If you can see that, it accepts multiple size stakes. You put the stake in and it clamps on and it holds it in place as your plant's growing up and in and through the support. And so it's a great addition if you're only using stakes in your garden. Let's move on to the trellis that I think that has really brought my garden to another level. This trellising here, I believe, has changed the game holistically in my garden. This is a cattle panel trellis. So basically, this is the type of fencing you would buy to build cattle panel fencing, you know, with livestock and farming and that kind of stuff. So I took that fencing, that cattle panel, and turned it into a trellis. They can come in many different sizes and shapes. These I purchased at 16 feet long, and I think they're, 4 feet or 50 inches or something like that wide. And I cut them down to the sizes of my beds. I'm using it to trellis my tomatoes. It's a one piece for the entire 8-foot bed. Once the tomato plants gets up to the bottom, we will weave its way through here and it will provide tremendous support to your tomato plants without individual tomato cages, without individual stakes, without all of those other pieces. That one piece will take care of the whole bed. I have T-posts every 4 to 6 feet. Those T-posts are holding these cattle panels in place. And so it's super sturdy. It's not going anywhere. No matter how much wind blow, this isn't going anywhere. The disadvantage of this particular type of trellising is that you're going to need a vehicle large enough to bring something like this to your garden, which I didn't have for many years. So this is the first year I have cattle panel trellising in my garden. And I made sure when Mr. Todd was available and he said he could help me out, I made sure I purchased enough to take care of the entire garden. So I bought them in 16-foot pieces and cut them down to size. Now they do come in 8-foot pieces as well. And you probably could cut them on site when you purchase them. From a cost effectiveness standpoint, a better value for your money to purchase the 16-foot panels versus the 8-foot panels. I have them throughout the garden, and I have well over 120 tomatoes between my garden here and my neighbor's garden next door. I am able to experiment with lots of different ways of staking up or trellising up tomatoes and peppers throughout my garden. My primary bed for all of my indeterminate tomatoes, the tomatoes that I absolutely want to get a good harvest on, I am using the cattle panels for that. all of my indeterminate tomatoes that are going to get huge. And I'm talking about beefsteaks, right? I'm looking for 2-pounders. So this absolutely will handle the weight of something like that. So let me just show you some of those in my garden. So as you can see here, there are quite a few of them throughout my garden. This one here is actually trellising grapes as well. I planted them last year. They were on 2-year-old vines, so this is year 3, and there are grapes there. There are definitely grapes on here. Now, grapes probably don't need a cattle panel that's this dense and, you know, this sturdy, this heavy duty. I tell you what, it adds a beauty to the garden for sure. And then you can take that cattle panel, just fold it in half. I have T-post on that side, and I have T-post on this side, and I just stuck one of those 16-foot panels in there, and I created an arch. I am having pole beans growing on the back of this arch, and then right next to it though, like really next to it there, which this isn't an arch beside it, but it's still cattle panel. I have sweet peas growing there. And then on this side of the arch, I am going to try to trellis up some additional winter squash here. And then just behind it here, I just took the cattle panel where I'm growing tomatoes and cucumbers and melon in this space as well. So those are the many different ways you can trellis your vegetables in your garden too. There are small space ways as well as big cattle panels if you have the room for it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel so I can keep bringing you all of this great video. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will see you back again here real soon. Bye.